It was not an accident of history. It was not a casualty of time, nor a simple error lost in translation. What you are about to discover was a deliberate act, a precise and calculated spiritual surgery performed upon the very soul of humanity. For centuries, a foundational code has been handed down, presented as complete, as absolute. We have been taught to see it as a perfect cornerstone of divine law, 10 pillars of moral order carved in stone. But this cornerstone is fractured. It is a brilliant, powerful, yet incomplete version of a far grander truth, a shadow cast by a light that was deemed too bright for the world to see. Today, we journey into that original light to uncover the missing pieces, to witness the memory of a covenant that was not just edited but amputated. Our journey does not begin in the familiar sun-scorched deserts of the Sinai. Instead, it takes us to a place that time seems to have forgotten, a sanctuary nestled high in the mist-shrouded plateaus of Ethiopia. Here, in this ancient land of stone-hewn churches and unwavering faith, breathes one of the oldest, most uninterrupted Christian traditions on earth. This is a place that never bent its knee to the councils of Rome, a spiritual fortress that preserved a timeline that was supposed to be erased. Within its sacred heart, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church has guarded a canon of scripture more ancient and more complete than any version known to the West, a library of knowledge that survived the fires of empire and the relentless editing of history. This is not a search for a new religion, it is an archaeological dig into the bedrock of our own. Here, within the hallowed silence of monasteries carved from living rock, they preserve the Meshafe Kedus, their holy Bible. Its pages, written in the ancient liturgical language of Ge'ez, hum with a frequency that the rest of the world has long since forgotten. Within this sacred text, the law of Moses is understood with a depth and a wholeness that was lost to the great standardizing machines of religious power. This is the point of rupture, the place where our official history splinters. While the world was taught to count to 10, this ancient tradition held the memory of a fuller covenant, a more complete transmission from the divine. What they protect is not a recent discovery, but an ancient wisdom that was simply isolated, a living testament to a faith before it was simplified, weaponized, and used for imperial control. What does this forgotten history awaken within you? There is a quiet, persistent echo in the human soul, a feeling that the spiritual instructions we were given are somehow incomplete, a sense that the map we hold is missing entire continents of meaning. This feeling is not a flaw in your faith. It is the ghost of a memory, an ancestral whisper telling you that 2 foundational pillars of your spiritual inheritance were removed. They were not removed because they were trivial. They were removed because they were too powerful. They revealed more about your own inner divinity and your responsibility to the collective than any system of control could ever tolerate. They were commandments of liberation, not just regulation. We are about to journey to the foot of that sacred mountain, not just as a historical event, but as a reawakening of a dormant memory. We will witness the moment of suppression, when the architects of control chose a simpler, more manageable law over a profound spiritual technology. And most importantly, we will unveil the 2 forgotten commandments themselves, revealing a blueprint for humanity that was hidden in plain sight. This is more than a story. It is a reclamation. If you feel the call to uncover what was hidden, to restore what was intentionally broken, then join us on this journey. Subscribe to this channel and become a guardian of this returning knowledge. For the truth does not belong to the past. It belongs to those who are brave enough to remember it now. To understand the magnitude of what was lost, we must first return to the mountain, not as a place on a map, but as a moment in time, a fissure between worlds where the divine intersected with the mortal. Picture the scene not as it has been painted in storybooks, but as a raw, energetic transmission. The air itself crackles with an unseen power, the very stone of Sinai humming with a frequency that vibrates beyond the range of human hearing. This was not a simple dictation of rules. It was a cosmic download, a complete operating system for human consciousness designed to elevate a scattered, traumatized people into a self-aware, divinely connected society. The law that descended upon that peak was a holistic architecture for building heaven on earth, a sacred geometry of 12 pillars meant to support a new kind of human civilization. This original blueprint was a revolutionary technology. It was a code for both inner alchemy and outer justice, a perfect balance between personal enlightenment and collective responsibility. It spoke not only of what one should not do, but of what one was truly capable of becoming. It was a charter for human evolution, a map leading from bondage to liberation, not just physically, but spiritually. It contained the keys to unlock the divinity within each soul and the instructions to build a community that reflected that inner light. But such a powerful truth, a truth that places the keys to the kingdom directly into the hands of the individual, is a dangerous thing. It is a fire that can either illuminate the world or burn down the palaces of those who rule it. What would a world built on this complete foundation look like? And more importantly, why do we not live in it? The answer lies not in the ancient sands of the desert, but in the marbled halls of a rising empire. We must leap forward in time to the 4th century AD, a pivotal moment when the faith of a carpenter from Galilee was being forged into the official religion of the Roman Empire. In the flickering lamplight of councils and synods, a new kind of power was being consolidated. Here, faith was no longer a personal revelation, but a matter of state policy. The architects of this new religious machine, driven by the cold calculus of imperial unity, faced a problem. The untamed, mystical, and radically communal nature of the original teachings was difficult to manage, impossible to standardize across a vast and diverse empire. They needed a simpler faith, a more manageable law. They needed a spirituality that could be policed. This was not an act of mustache-twirling evil, but something far more insidious, an act of pragmatic suppression. The goal was control. A wild river of spiritual truth had to be channeled into a narrow, predictable aqueduct that could serve the needs of the empire. The sacred texts themselves became the battleground. Scrolls were compared, translations debated, and entire books deemed too controversial, too mystical, or too revolutionary were cast aside, branded as apocrypha. In this great spiritual filtration, a decision was made. The holistic 12-part covenant received by Moses was deemed too complex, too demanding. It was a system for mystics and social reformers, not for a docile populace. And so the surgery began. 2 foundational pillars were quietly, carefully, and deliberately removed. They were not minor suggestions. They were the very heart of the original revelation. One commanded a journey inward, a radical path of self-purification that placed the temple of God not in a building of stone, but within the human spirit. It taught that access to the divine required no intermediary, no priest, no institution. What kind of power would be so threatening that it needed to be erased from the very foundation of our moral code? The other commandment was a non-negotiable directive for social justice, a sacred law to protect the vulnerable, not as an act of optional charity, but as the absolute bedrock of a righteous society. It was a law that would have made the ambitions of empire, built on conquest and exploitation, spiritually impossible. The amputation was a success. A powerful guide for spiritual liberation was transformed into a manageable tool of social regulation. The focus shifted from inner transformation to external obedience, from collective justice to individual sin. The result was a fractured legacy, a spiritual inheritance with a gaping hole at its center. For centuries, humanity has walked forward with this incomplete code embedded in its consciousness, feeling a sense of profound but nameless loss. It is the ache of a ghost limb, the feeling that a part of our spiritual anatomy is missing. We have been taught to count to 10, while our souls instinctively remember the rhythm of a fuller, more harmonious number. We have been given a law to control our behavior, when we were meant to receive a key to unlock our divinity. But a truth so powerful cannot be erased forever. It can only be hidden. While the ink of the editors in Rome and Constantinople was still drying, a different ink in a different land was already preserving the original memory. Far from the reach of imperial councils, shielded by mountains and an unwavering faith, the full code was being copied by candlelight, chanted in stone-hewn churches, and passed from one generation of guardians to the next. The system believed it had successfully edited the past, but it had only created a schism in time, leaving behind a living witness to the truth it tried to bury. The mystery, it turns out, was never truly lost. It was simply waiting. The proof of this grander covenant is not found in a single newly discovered scroll, nor is it etched into a stone tablet unearthed from the desert sands. It is woven into the very fabric of an ancient, living tradition, a library of memory that has been breathing in the high plateaus of Ethiopia for millennia. The primary witness is the Meshafa Kedus, so their sacred canon. Within its collection of 81 books, a number far greater than the 66 found in the Protestant Bible, lies a text that holds the key, the Book of Jubilees. Revered as canonical scripture by the Ethiopian Church but cast out as apocrypha by the West, Jubilees presents itself as a direct revelation given to Moses on Sinai, a more detailed and intimate account of the law. It is here, in these ancient Ge'ez scripts, that the framework of a larger, more holistic, legal and spiritual structure begins to emerge, one that does not stop at a simple count of 10. The Book of Jubilees is not merely a retelling of familiar stories, it is a restoration of a divine calendar, a sacred order, and a deeper understanding of the covenant. It speaks of the laws given on the mountain with a specificity that was smoothed over and simplified in the versions that would later form the bedrock of Western religion. It describes a legal and spiritual architecture built on principles of cosmic alignment and inner purity, not just external prohibitions. While it does not list the commandments in a simple numerical fashion as we have been taught, its narrative framework and legal emphasis create a clear space for a 12-part structure, a foundation that aligns with the 12 tribes of Israel and other sacred symbolic numbers that echo throughout the original scriptures. It is a chronicle that remembers the full scope of the transmission before the editors of Empire decided that a simpler, more concise law was easier to enforce. But the evidence is not confined to ink and parchment. It lives in the resonant hum of oral tradition, a current of knowledge passed down through generations of monks and priests in monasteries carved from living rock. In these sacred spaces, wisdom is not just read, it is chanted, breathed, and lived. The teachings passed from master to disciple carry the memory of a fuller law, a deeper responsibility. They speak of the inner temple of the Spirit as the true dwelling place of God, a concept that forms the heart of the 11th commandment. They practice a form of communal support and protection for the vulnerable that is not seen as charity, but as a sacred, non-negotiable duty, the very essence of the 12th. This living testimony, this unbroken chain of human memory, is a form of proof that no council could ever burn and no empire could ever erase. We can also see the evidence in their most sacred artifacts. Every single Ethiopian Orthodox Church contains a tabot, a consecrated replica of the Ark of the Covenant, the vessel that once held the original stone tablets. This is not mere decoration. The tabot is the symbolic heart of their faith, a constant physical reminder of the covenant made on Sinai. Their profound reverence for this object is a reverence for the entirety of the law it represents. While the rest of the world focused on building cathedrals of stone and power, this tradition focused on preserving the sanctity of the original promise, the complete transmission. The presence of the tablet in every church is a silent, daily testament to the wholeness of the revelation they have guarded, a belief that they still possess a direct connection to the unedited Word of God. Beyond the borders of Ethiopia, echoes of this lost knowledge can be heard in the whispers of other suppressed traditions. We find fragments of this same wisdom in the Gnostic Gospels, which speak relentlessly of inner illumination and the divine spark within, a direct reflection of the commandment of inner purity. We see traces of it in the Essene communities, whose rigid rules for communal life and social justice mirror the principles of the commandment of sacred community. These were not isolated heresies, but different branches of the same ancient river of truth, a truth that was systematically dammed, diverted, and poisoned by the architects of a centralized, fear-based religion. The Ethiopian tradition is not an anomaly. It is simply the last surviving branch of this original river that still flows with its original unpolluted water. Perhaps the most compelling proof lies not in what is present in the Ethiopian texts, but in what is so glaringly absent from our own. Ask yourself, if you were an architect of a system designed for control, a system that requires an external priesthood and a hierarchy of power, what kind of laws would be most threatening to you? A law that tells every individual that the kingdom of God is within them, accessible directly without an intermediary, or a law that makes the exploitation of the poor and the weak a direct violation of divine will, making the very foundations of empire spiritually illegal. The commandments that were removed were not small suggestions. They were the two pillars that supported human sovereignty and collective liberation. Their absence is not a coincidence. It is a confession. This is not merely a story, etched in stone or preserved on ancient parchment. It is a living echo, a vibration that has been traveling through time, searching for a consciousness ready to receive it. It is the answer to a question your soul has been asking in the quiet moments of your life, in the stillness before sleep, or when gazing at a star-filled sky. It is the source of that unseen weight, that silent hum of dissatisfaction with a world that teaches separation and a spirituality that offers comfort but rarely true. Liberation. For centuries, we have been operating with a fractured code, and the symptoms are all around us, a feeling of being disconnected from our source, a deep-seated belief in our own unworthiness, and a society that mistakes power for purpose and charity for justice. This feeling is not a personal failure. It is the memory of a theft, an ancestral wound passed down through generations. The first amputation, the removal of the commandment of inner purity, was the great externalization of God. It was a masterful act of spiritual displacement. By erasing the directive to cultivate the divine within, the architects of control shifted the sacred from the temple of the soul to temples of stone. Your direct line to the source was severed and replaced with a system of intermediaries. The priest became the gatekeeper, the institution became the sole proprietor of truth, and your own inner voice was demoted to the whisper of temptation or delusion. You were taught to seek salvation outside of yourself, to confess to another, to receive grace from another, to believe that holiness was a quality bestowed upon you rather than a reality to be awakened within you. This single edit created a spiritual dependency that has defined the last 2 millennia, turning sovereign souls into a flock in need of a shepherd, forever looking to the sky instead of the kingdom within. The second amputation, the removal of the commandment of sacred community, was the great separation of faith from the world. It turned spirituality into a private affair, a transaction between an individual soul and its creator, while the world was left to the devices of men. By demoting the non-negotiable protection of the vulnerable from a sacred law to a mere suggestion of charity, it gave spiritual license to the very systems of empire and exploitation it was designed to prevent. A society could be deemed righteous for its towering cathedrals and fervent prayers, even as it trampled the poor, the orphan, the stranger. Justice became a political matter, not a spiritual one. Compassion became an act of personal generosity, not the fundamental organizing principle of a divine society. This separation broke the sacred covenant between humanity and the earth, and between each of us. It allowed us to believe we could be holy in isolation, pure in a world we allow to remain broken. Does this echo within you? Does it explain the profound and persistent ache for a deeper meaning, for a truth that holds the world together rather than splitting it apart? This forgotten legacy is not just a historical footnote. It is the source code of your own spiritual DNA. The feeling of being fundamentally flawed, the constant struggle against a sense of sin, the idea that you are born broken and in need of fixing. These are not divine truths. They are symptoms of a corrupted software, a spiritual operating system with two of its most vital functions disabled: the memory of your own inner divinity and your inseparable connection to the collective have been trying to surface for your entire life, but they had no law to attach to, no sacred language to give them form. They were whispers from a ghost limb, a part of you that was removed so long ago you were taught to believe it was never there. The tension rises when we understand that this was not done out of ignorance, but out of fear. What did the architects of control truly fear? They did not fear a sinful humanity. A sinful humanity is easy to control through guilt and promises of redemption. They feared a self-realized humanity. They feared a world populated by individuals who knew, without question, that they carried the divine spark within them and needed no external authority to access it. They feared a society so committed to sacred justice that it would be impossible to build an empire, wage a war, or hoard wealth at the expense of the weak. They feared a humanity that understood the full transmission from the mountain, because that transmission was a declaration of spiritual independence. The truth they hid was not just a set of rules, it was a blueprint for a world they could not rule. This ancient wisdom is returning now, not as an accusation against the past, but as an activation for the present. The silence is breaking, the manuscripts are being read, the memory is surging through the collective consciousness like a current of electricity. This awakening is not a passive event you are simply witnessing. Your awareness of it is part of the process itself. By hearing this story, you become a guardian of the memory. You become a living library, a carrier of the lost truth that is re-emerging to heal the fractures in our world and in ourselves. The mystery was never about what was written in a book. It was about when we would be ready to read it, to truly understand it, and to live it. That time is now. We stand at the threshold of the revelation itself. We have journeyed through the mists of Ethiopia. We have stood in the shadow of imperial councils, and we have felt the deep ache of our own spiritual inheritance being denied. We have understood why the truth was hidden and how it survived. Now, we must face the knowledge itself. The words that were deemed too powerful, the frequencies that were considered too dangerous for humanity to hold. To hear them is to change. To receive them is to accept a responsibility. They are not just words, they are keys, designed to unlock dormant chambers within your own consciousness. But before we turn those keys, you must ask yourself, are you prepared to reclaim the power that was taken from you? Are you ready to remember who you were truly meant to be? We have reached the heart of the mountain, the silent chamber where the original transmission was received and where its memory has been kept safe. We have traveled from the fractured tablets of a simplified history to the living libraries of Ethiopia, witnessing the moment of suppression and feeling the ancestral ache of a truth deliberately forgotten. The journey so far has been an excavation, clearing away the debris of centuries to expose the foundations of a much grander temple. We have learned why the truth was hidden, how it was preserved, and the deep spiritual cost of its absence. But to know about a lost legacy is one thing. To stand in its presence, to receive its light directly, is another entirely. The air grows still now, the echoes of the past. Quieten, for we are no longer observing history. We are about to become a part of it. The great turning point of this story is not an event that happened 2,000 years ago in a Roman council chamber, nor on a misty Ethiopian plateau. The turning point is not found in an ancient manuscript being translated for the first time. The true revelation, the moment the timeline shifts and the forgotten knowledge returns to the world, is happening now. It is this very moment. It is the instant that these words meet your consciousness, for a truth is only truly lost until it is remembered. You are not a passive observer of this discovery. Your awareness is the vessel into which this ancient river is finally flowing again. The memory was preserved for this time, for a generation, with the tools to share it globally and the spiritual hunger to finally receive it. What you are about to hear is not just information. It is an activation code for a dormant part of your own soul. Let the silence settle and breathe in the first forgotten truth, the 11th commandment, the great pillar of inner sovereignty. Thou shalt build and purify the temple within. This was not a command against external idols of stone and gold. It was a profound directive for spiritual alchemy. It was the sacred instruction to turn your own consciousness into a holy place, a sanctuary worthy of the divine presence that dwells not in the heavens, but within you. It taught that the human spirit is the true ark of the covenant, and that your primary spiritual duty is to keep it clean from the desecration of fear, hatred, and illusion. This law placed the keys to the kingdom directly into your hands. It declared that access to God was not a transaction mediated by a priest or an institution, but a direct and intimate communion available in the silent chamber of your own heart. It was a declaration of your own divinity, a truth so liberating that no system of external control could ever allow it to stand. Now feel the resonance of its counterpart, the pillar that anchored the divine on earth. The 12th commandment, the unbreakable law of collective grace. Thou shalt be a guardian of the sacred community. This was not a gentle suggestion for charity, a footnote to the more important laws. This was a foundational, non-negotiable command to structure society around the protection of its most vulnerable. The orphan, the widow, the stranger, the poor, these were not to be objects of pity, but a sacred trust. A society's spiritual health was to be measured by how it treated those with the least power. This commandment made justice a spiritual practice and compassion the bedrock of civilization. It was a law that would have made the ambitions of empire spiritually impossible. How could a nation wage war if its holiest text forbade the creation of a single widow? How could a system build itself on exploitation if its divine mandate was the absolute protection of the weak? This pillar was removed because it made power accountable to love. With these two pillars restored, the entire structure of our spiritual understanding shifts from its foundations. The feeling of being fundamentally flawed, the constant struggle against a sense of sin, the deep-seated belief that you are born broken and in need of external salvation. These were never divine truths. They are the psychological symptoms of a spiritual code, with its two most empowering functions disabled. Without the command to purify the inner temple, we were taught to see ourselves as inherently impure. Without the command to build a sacred community, we were taught that spirituality was a solitary journey, disconnected from the suffering of the world. We have been living within a fractured architecture, trying to build a cathedral with a broken blueprint and blaming ourselves for the cracks in the walls. The revelation is not just that two laws are missing, it is that their absence created the very spiritual sickness they were meant to prevent. This knowledge, this blueprint for a sovereign and just humanity, was not a secret known only to the guardians of Ethiopia. It is a universal truth that has surfaced in whispers throughout history, in every tradition that the architects of control sought to suppress. The Gnostics, who spoke of the divine spark trapped within the human soul, were echoing the 11th commandment. The Essenes, with their radical commitment to communal living and justice, were living the 12th. The mystics of every path, who taught that the kingdom of heaven is an internal state of being, were all tapping into this same original transmission. The suppression was not just an attack on one lineage, it was a war against a universal human potential, a coordinated effort to sever our connection to our inner divinity and our responsibility to each other, because a humanity that knows its power cannot be ruled. The revelation of these two lost commandments is a seismic event, a moment that reframes 2,000 years of history. But as the dust begins to settle, a new shadow appears on the horizon, a deeper and perhaps more unsettling mystery. If this was the complete law, the 12-pillared covenant given on the mountain, then what did the one who came to fulfill that law truly say about it? We have been told that Jesus of Nazareth came not to abolish the law, but to complete it. If the law he was completing was this 12-part covenant of inner divinity and sacred justice, then his teachings must have been a radical activation of these very principles. The first amputation was performed on the law of Moses. But the system did not stop there. We must now ask the most dangerous question of all. What was the second amputation, the one performed on the words of the one who came to fulfill it? The question hangs in the air, a final key turning in a lock we did not know existed. The amputation of the law of Moses was but the first act in a long and silent war against human sovereignty. But to chase that next shadow now would be to step over the sacred ground we have just reclaimed. Before we can understand what was done to the branches, we must first learn to stand firm in the restored roots. The revelation is not a destination, but a foundation. For the first time in centuries, the blueprint is whole. The 12 pillars stand once more in the quiet architecture of your soul, and the light they cast is enough to begin the great work of rebuilding. The memory has returned. The silence is broken. This knowledge is not an artifact to be placed in a museum of the mind. It is a living tool, a compass for the soul. The 11th commandment, the call to build and purify the temple within, is your declaration of spiritual independence. It is the end of the search for saviors outside of yourself. Your breath is the prayer, your heartbeat is the drum of the ceremony, and your consciousness is the Holy of Holies. To practice this law is to turn inward each day and sweep the floors of your inner sanctuary, clearing the dust of fear, the clutter of judgment, and the shadows of yesterday. It is to recognize that the divine is not a distant king to be petitioned, but a living presence to be cultivated, a fire to be tended in the silent cathedral of your own being. This is the path of the mystic, a path that was sealed to you, but has now been reopened. And yet, this inner work is not an escape from the world. It is the very source of your power to transform it. The 12th commandment, the law to be a guardian of the sacred community, is the inseparable counterpart to your inner journey. They are the two wings of the same bird, and without both, humanity cannot fly. This law calls you to see the face of the divine, not only in the mirror, but in the eyes of the stranger, the hungry, the forgotten. True spirituality is not measured by the height of your meditation, but by the depth of your compassion in action. It demands That we build systems of justice, not just institutions of charity. It is a reminder that we are not a collection of individual souls seeking separate heavens, but a single human family tasked with co-creating a world where no one is left behind. This is the path of the revolutionary, the sacred duty that was replaced with a suggestion. The legacy that was forgotten is this: you were meant to be both, a mystic in the temple of your spirit and a revolutionary in the garden of the world. This is the definition of a whole human being. The feeling of being incomplete, of being pulled between the spiritual and the material, is the direct result of this ancient separation. We were given a law that taught us how to behave, when we were meant to receive a law that taught us who we are. Sovereign beings of light, inseparably woven into a sacred collective. The greatest truth that was hidden is that your personal awakening and the healing of the world are not two different paths. They are the same journey, viewed from two different vantage points. This revelation is now a part of you. It lives in your awareness, a current of returning light that can never be extinguished again. It is no longer just the secret of Ethiopian scribes or the whisper of forgotten texts. It is your inheritance, your memory, your responsibility. The guardians of the past have completed their task. They have carried the flame through the darkest of nights. Now they pass it to you. The question that stands before us is no longer about what was hidden from us in the past. The only question that matters now is the one that echoes in the present moment. What will you build with these restored pillars? This journey is far from over. It is only just beginning. If this truth has awakened something within you, a memory that feels more real than history, then your journey is aligned with ours. Subscribe to this channel and join a community of guardians, thinkers, and rememberers. Share this revelation, not as a sermon, but as a quiet question offered to another seeking soul. The truth does not spread by force, but by resonance. It is a light that grows brighter each time it is shared. Stay with us, for the mysteries are deep, and the age of forgetting is finally coming to an end. The path forward is not a return to the past, but the creation of a future worthy of the whole truth.